He broke her, took everything, and left her with nothing but his pity. 1 year after a brutal divorce, Brendan Cole was a king, and his ex-wife Isabella was a ghost. He even sent her an invitation to his greatest triumph, expecting her to crawl back, broken and begging. He expected tears. He expected to see the woman he'd destroyed. What he didn't expect was the man she brought with her. And he certainly didn't expect that man to be Matteo Hawthorne. The oversized, cream-colored envelope felt heavy in Isabella Quinn's hand, its weight a physical manifestation of the dread pooling in her stomach. It wasn't just heavy, it was expensive. The cardstock was thick, embossed with a gold logo she knew better than her own reflection. The Cole Foundation. It had been 368 days since the divorce was finalized. 368 days since she had walked out of the sterile courtroom, leaving behind Brendan Cole, the man she had met in a college library and spent 15 years building. He kept the sprawling penthouse, the luxury cars, and the foundation they had started together. Isabella kept her maiden name. She slit the envelope open with a kitchen knife, her hand trembling slightly. Inside, the invitation was as ostentatious as she expected. The 3rd annual Cole Foundation Gala. Black tie, the Grand Elsia Hotel. Tucked behind the main invitation was a smaller, personal note, scrawled in Brendan's arrogant, slanted handwriting. Bella, I've enclosed 2 tickets. I insist you come. It's for the children, after all. Feel free to bring a date, if you can find one. It's been a year. We should really talk, clear the air about the past. B. Isabella sank onto the stool in her tiny, rented apartment. The "if you can find one" was a deliberate barb. The "clear the air" was a threat. Brendan didn't want to clear the air. He wanted to see her fail. He wanted to parade his new, younger wife, Lauren Sinclair, in front of her. He wanted to stand on his glittering stage and look down at Isabella in the crowd, confirming his decision to discard her was the right one. Her mind flashed back to their last, brutal fight. "You're nothing without me, Bella," he had screamed, his face purple. "You're a small-town librarian who got lucky. You'll be back. Within a year, you'll be begging me to take you back." She had not begged. Instead, she had taken the paltry, one-time settlement, an amount he considered generous, but was, in fact, an insult, and disappeared. She'd found this small apartment above a flower shop. She'd gotten a job. Not as a librarian, that required a master's she'd abandoned to support his career, but as the manager of a struggling independent bookstore, The Last Page. It was quiet. It was hers. She sorted paperbacks, hosted a small reading group for local kids, and slowly, painfully, began to piece herself back together. Brendan, meanwhile, had flourished. He and Lauren, the 24-year-old intern he'd sworn was just a friend, were the city's new golden couple. Their faces were plastered on every society page, their philanthropy changing the city. But Isabella knew the truth. She was the one who had come up with the idea for a children's literacy fund. She was the one who had structured the entire charity. Brendan had just been the face, and now he was the sole beneficiary. A tear of pure, unadulterated rage dripped onto the invitation. He wanted to see her broken? He wanted her to beg? Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Matt. "Matt, thinking of you. Did the package arrive?" Isabella smiled, the first genuine smile of the day. Matt was Matteo Hawthorne, and the package was not the insulting invitation from Brendan. Their meeting had been the definition of serendipity. 6 months ago, drowning in debt from the bookstore's failing sales, Isabella had taken a second job, a weekend gig waitressing for a high-end catering company. It was humiliating, but it paid the bills. She was serving champagne at a private donor event at the Museum of Modern Art when a man, dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit, had stopped her. "That's a 1948 Patek Philippe," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the wrist of the politician she was serving. A perpetual calendar. He's wearing a $200,000 watch to ask for donations for the homeless. The irony is staggering. Isabella had muffled a laugh. "I believe his speech is about shared sacrifice, sir." The man's eyes, a deep, startling shade of grey, had finally met hers. He didn't look at her like a servant. He looked at her like a person. "What's your name?" "Isabella." "I'm Matt." He hadn't taken a glass of champagne. "You don't belong here, Isabella." "We all have to pay the bills, Matt," she'd countered, her professionalism kicking in. "Some bills cost too much," he'd murmured. He took a card from his pocket and a pen. "You're an art history buff, aren't you? You've been correcting the tour guide under your breath for 10 minutes. She'd blushed. "He keeps saying the Picasso is from his Rose period. It's clearly analytical cubism." He'd scribbled on the back of the card. "My foundation is looking for an acquisitions consultant. It's a real job, not this. Call this number. Ask for Ms. DeWitt. She'll be expecting you." Isabella had gotten the job. It was part-time, but it paid 3 times her bookstore salary. She'd quit the catering gig immediately. Matt turned out to be Matteo Hawthorne, the reclusive, legendary CEO of Hawthorne Industries, a man whose net worth was discussed in whispers and whose philanthropy was vast and anonymous. He had pursued her slowly, respectfully. He was nothing like Brendan. Where Brendan was loud, Matteo was quiet. Where Brendan demanded the spotlight, Matteo avoided it. He had listened to her story, his jaw tightening when she spoke of Brendan's betrayal. Now they were more than friends. They were everything. She picked up her phone and typed, "Isabella." It arrived, the invitation. "Matt." "Good. And the other one?" Isabella. "Yes, that one too." Matt. "So we're going?" Isabella looked at Brendan's arrogant scrawl. "If you can find a date." She thought of Matteo, the kindest, most powerful man she had ever known, who was currently waiting for her to get dressed so he could take her to dinner. Isabella. "Yes, we are going." "And Matt?" Matt. "Yes, my love." Isabella. "Thank you." For the dress. In her bedroom, draped across her bed, was the package he had sent. It was a long, midnight blue velvet gown by a designer she couldn't even pronounce, the kind of dress that cost more than her apartment. Beside it, in a black velvet box, was a necklace of sapphires and diamonds that stole her breath. Brendan wanted to see her broken. He was about to be bitterly disappointed. The Grand Elsia Hotel was a temple of old money and new arrogance. Its lobby was a cavern of marble, gold leaf, and hushed reverence. Brendan Cole stood at the entrance to the grand ballroom, a conquering hero on his home turf. He was a vision of success, custom tuxedo, $1,000 haircut, and Lauren Sinclair on his arm. Lauren was a masterpiece of surgical enhancement and ruthless ambition. Her dress was fire-engine red, cut so low it was a structural miracle, and adorned with a diamond necklace Brendan had surprised her with. Purchased, of course, with money from the Foundation's operating budget. "He's here, Lawrence Pope, from the mayor's office," Lauren hissed, squeezing Brendan's arm. "Excellent," Brendan muttered, flashing his camera-ready smile. He scanned the entrance. Is she here yet?" Lauren rolled her eyes. "Brendan, darling, why are you obsessed with your pathetic ex-wife? It's been an hour. She's not coming. She probably got as far as the lobby, realized her thrift store dress didn't meet the dress code, and ran home crying." You're right, Brendan said, though he felt a pang of disappointment. The pity was a key part of his evening. He had rehearsed the speech. Isabella, it's so good to see you. You look healthy. Listen, I know things are tight. The foundation would be happy to make a donation to your new life. He'd look magnanimous. Lauren would look sympathetic. It would be perfect. Mr. Cole, a photographer snapped his picture. You and Mrs. Cole look stunning. Brendan beamed. It's all for the children, he said, the words rolling smoothly off his tongue. And then the room changed. It wasn't a loud noise. It was the opposite. It was the sound of 100 private conversations simultaneously stopping. It was the collective turning of heads, a ripple of silence that started at the grand entrance and moved inward, like a shockwave. What is it? Lauren asked, annoyed at the shift in focus. Brendan turned, and his world stopped. Isabella Quinn stood in the doorway. But it wasn't the Isabella he knew. The mousy, sensible, beige-wearing woman he'd divorced was gone. This woman was an apparition. The midnight blue velvet gown clung to her in a way that was both elegant and devastatingly sensual. Her dark hair was swept up, showcasing the cascade of sapphires at her throat. She was poised, her back straight, her chin high. She was beautiful. She was a queen. But it wasn't just her. It was the man she was with. Brendan's blood turned to ice water. He knew that face. Every person in that room knew that face, even though he was rarely seen. It was the face that graced the cover of Forbes and Fortune only when he couldn't stop them. Matteo Hawthorne, the tech titan, the multi-billionaire recluse, the man who could buy and sell Brendan's entire life before his first cup of coffee. The man Brendan had been sending desperate, unanswered queries to for 6 months, begging for a 5-minute meeting. Matteo Hawthorne, with his hand resting possessively on the small of Isabella's back, was leaning down to whisper something in her ear, making her laugh. A light, genuine laugh that Brendan hadn't heard in years. Brendan, who is that? Lauren's voice was sharp, her nails digging into his arm. Oh my God. The couple began to walk toward them. Every step was a hammer blow. Brendan's smile was no longer a smile. It was a rictus of pure terror. His perfectly rehearsed pity speech dissolved into ash in his mouth. They stopped, 2 feet away. The air crackled. Isabella looked at him. Her eyes were not full of tears. They were clear, calm, and held a glint of something he'd never seen before. Power. Brendan, she said, her voice smooth as silk. Lauren, you look... Well. Brendan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He was choking. Matteo Hawthorne extended his hand, not to Brendan, but to Lauren. His grip was firm, his smile non-existent. Lauren Sinclair, he said, his voice a cold, precise instrument. Then he turned to Brendan. His grey eyes were like steel traps. He did not extend his hand. Mr. Cole, Matteo said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a judgment. And then, the final, devastating blow. Matteo turned back to Isabella, his entire demeanor softening as he looked at her. He lifted her left hand, the one that wasn't holding a simple clutch, and kissed her gloved knuckles. On her ring finger, sparkling under the crystal chandeliers, was a diamond. It wasn't a ring. It was an iceberg. A flawless, emerald-cut diamond so large, so impossibly clear, that it made Lauren's own 2-carat trophy look like a particle of salt. My fiancée, Matteo announced, his voice carrying easily in the sudden hush. Isabella Quinn. Fiancée? The word hit Brendan like a physical blow. Lauren actually recoiled, a small, strangled "oh" escaping her lips. Isabella hadn't found a date. She had found a king, and she wasn't here as a ghost. She was here as the guest of honor. Brendan looked at the woman he had called nothing. He looked at the man who had everything, and he looked at the ring that bound them. His perfect night, his triumph, had just turned into his public execution. The ballroom was a sea of whispers. The focus was no longer on the stage, the ice sculpture, or the mayor. The gravitational center of the room had shifted, and it was now firmly planted on the couple standing before Brendan Cole. "Fiancé," Lauren hissed, her mask of polite society cracking, her voice loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "You? His fiancé? That's impossible." Isabella merely raised an elegant eyebrow. "Is it, Lauren? I believe you, of all people, should know that things and people can be replaced." The barb hit its mark. Lauren's face, tight with fillers, flushed a dangerous shade of red. Brendan, finally finding his voice, scrambled for control. He was a salesman, and this was the biggest sale of his life. He forced a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Bella, my God, you're full of surprises." He clapped his hands together, the sound unnaturally loud. "And Matteo Hawthorne, what an honor, sir. I had no idea you two were acquainted." Matteo finished for him. His tone was arctic. "We are." He adjusted the cuff of his shirt, a subtle, powerful gesture. "Isabella has been advising my foundation on its European art acquisitions for months. She has one of the keenest eyes in the industry." Brendan's brain couldn't process the information. Isabella? His Isabella? The one who organized his sock drawer and managed his calendar? An acquisitions consultant? I had no idea," Brendan stammered. "I've been trying to get a meeting with your office for ages. Hawthorne Industries is exactly the kind of partner we're looking for at the Cole Foundation. We're doing revolutionary work in—" "I'm not here for business, Mr. Cole." Matteo cut him off. The Mr. Cole was deliberate, a formal wall. "I am here socially, as a guest of my fiancé." He stressed the word fiancé again, and with it he took Isabella's hand. He didn't just hold it, he possessed it, lacing his fingers with hers in a gesture of undeniable intimacy and ownership. Brendan watched, horrified, as Matteo Hawthorne, the man whose name opened doors, shattered markets, and commanded an almost feudal respect, led his ex-wife into his ballroom. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. "Brendan, do something," Lauren demanded, her voice a frantic whisper. "He's making you look like a fool. This is your night." "I am," Brendan growled, his mind racing. He was losing. He was losing badly. He needed to regain control. He hurried after them, his smile stapled back in place. "Matteo! Isabella! Please, you must sit at the head table. With me. As my guests of honor." Matteo paused, turning slowly. He looked down at Brendan from his slightly taller height. "No, thank you. We wouldn't want to impose. I believe our table is over there." He gestured toward a quiet, secluded table in the corner, set for two, which had "reserved" on a gold placard. "Oh, but I insist," Brendan said, sweating through his tuxedo. "We have so much to catch up on. Don't we, Bella?" Isabella looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Brendan, I think we've said all we need to say, for the last 15 years. But the past," Brendan pleaded, dropping his voice and trying for the old, manipulative intimacy they'd shared. "The note. I meant it. I'm sorry for how things ended." It was a desperate, tactical lie. Matteo Hawthorne stepped in front of Isabella, shielding her. "Mr. Cole, my fiancée's past is her own, but her future is mine, and I can assure you, you are not in it. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're here to support the children." Matteo's hand was on Isabella's back, a silent, unmovable wall. They walked away, leaving Brendan and Lauren standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, the whispers following them like vultures. He dismissed you," Lauren sputtered, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. "In front of everyone, he dismissed us." Brendan stared at their retreating backs. He wasn't just a host anymore. He was a spectator at his own execution. The night was supposed to be his. He was supposed to be the king. But a real king had just walked into the room, and he had brought Brendan's ex-wife as his queen. "It's fine," Brendan said, adjusting his tie, his hand shaking. "It's fine. He's just protective. He doesn't know her like I do. He doesn't know the real Isabella. She's a gold digger. She must have tricked him." "Tricked him?" Lauren scoffed. "Brendan, that man is not a fool. He's Matteo Hawthorne. He could have her investigated, indicted, and incarcerated in 3 different countries before breakfast. If he's with her, it's because he wants to be." Lauren looked at the ring on her own finger, and then at the distant supernova glint from Isabella's. For the first time, she looked at Brendan with something other than adoration. She looked at him with calculation, and with a dawning, terrible contempt. "You need to fix this, Brendan," she said, her voice cold. "You need to go up on that stage and remind them who is in charge. Because right now, you look like the help." Brendan's jaw clenched. She was right. He had one card left to play, his speech, the auction. He would re-establish his power. He would show Matteo Hawthorne and the entire city that he was the one who mattered. He strode toward the stage, his heart pounding a rhythm of pure, unadulterated panic. The script for the night was on fire, and he was left with only the ashes. The ballroom lights dimmed, and a single, warm spotlight found Brendan Cole on the stage. He tapped the microphone, the thump-thump echoing through the suddenly silent room. He was a good public speaker. It was his one real talent. He fed on the energy of a crowd, and tonight he needed to feed. "Welcome. Welcome. Friends, partners, believers," he began, his voice booming with a confidence he did not feel. "Welcome to the 3rd annual Cole Foundation Gala. We are here tonight for one reason." He paused, scanning the crowd. He saw Matteo and Isabella at their table. They were in their own world. Matteo was listening intently as Isabella spoke, her face animated. They weren't even looking at the stage. Brendan's blood boiled. He raised his voice. "We are here for the children, for the future, for literacy." There was a spatter of polite applause. "When I started this foundation," he continued, lying without a second thought, "I had a dream that no child in this city would be left behind, just because they couldn't afford a book." At their table, Isabella stopped talking. She looked at Matteo. "He started it?" she whispered, her voice laced with ice. "I spent 6 months writing the business plan and filing the 501c3 paperwork while he was networking at the golf club." Matteo covered her hand with his. "Patience, my love. The main course is coming." Brendan's speech went on for 10 agonizing minutes, a self-congratulatory monologue that painted him as a lone savior of the city's youth. He finally, mercifully, concluded and moved on to the main event. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for, the live auction. Various items were brought out: a week in Tuscany, a private dinner with a celebrity chef. The bidding was respectable. Then came the final, grand prize item. "And finally, our grand prize lot," Brendan announced, his voice trembling with manufactured excitement. "A full 1-year partnership with the Cole Foundation. The winner's name, or their company's name, will be co-branded on our new downtown literacy center. We'll start the bidding at $100,000. The room was quiet. This was a business donation, not a vacation. 100,000? Brendan prodded. 100, a voice from the back called out. It was one of Brendan's board members, a plant. I have 100. Do I hear 150? Silence. This is for the children, ladies and gentlemen. And then, from the corner table, a hand went up. Not a paddle, just a hand. Matteo Hawthorne. Brendan's heart leapt. This was it. I see a bid from Mr. Matteo Hawthorne. Sir, a very generous. What is the bid? Matteo didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice cut through the room like a diamond. $1 million. The room gasped. Lauren's jaw dropped. Brendan felt a dizzying rush of triumph. He'd done it. He had won. Matteo Hawthorne was backing him. 1 million, Brendan stammered. Sold to Mr. Matteo Hawthorne for $1 million. The ballroom exploded in applause. Brendan was beaming, incandescent with victory. He had been humiliated, yes, but $1 million donation from Matteo Hawthorne washed away all sins. It was more than validation. It was a coronation. Mr. Hawthorne, please, Brendan said, gesturing to the stage. Please come up and say a few words. Matteo stood. He straightened his tuxedo jacket, kissed Isabella's temple, and moved toward the stage with the unhurried, predatory grace of a panther. He took the microphone from a trembling Brendan. Thank you, Brendan, he said. The use of his first name felt like a sudden intimacy. Brendan nearly wept with relief. It is a pleasure to support children's literacy, Matteo continued, his voice resonating with authority. It's a cause that my fiancée, Isabella, has been passionate about her entire life. A passion she brought to this very foundation when she co-founded it. Brendan's smile froze. Co-founded. And I am so moved by the cause tonight, Matteo went on, that my foundation will be matching that $1 million donation. We will be donating $2 million to children's literacy tonight. The applause was deafening. Brendan was ecstatic. $2 million. However, Matteo said, and the room went silent again. However, we will be redirecting the funds. Brendan's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Matteo looked directly at Brendan. The warmth was gone. His eyes were pure, cold steel. My company, Hawthorne Industries, runs on data and due diligence. It's a habit. So, when Isabella expressed concern about the foundation she had poured her heart into, I had my forensic accounting team take a quiet look at the Cole Foundation's public filings. Brendan stopped breathing. And we discovered some irregularities, Matteo said, his voice laced with casual contempt. An overhead of nearly 92%. Less than 8 cents of every dollar actually goes to the children. The rest, it seems, goes to administrative fees, gala expenses, like this one, and executive compensation. Specifically your compensation, Mr. Cole. It was an execution, live, on stage, in front of the entire city. This isn't a charity, Matteo stated, his voice booming. It's a very expensive piggy bank. Now wait just a minute, Brendan stammered, lunging for the mic. Matteo held up a hand, and Brendan froze, as if commanded by an invisible force. Therefore, my $2 million donation will not be going to the Cole Foundation. It will instead be the seed money for an entirely new fund. Matteo turned, his eyes finding Isabella in the crowd. A spotlight, as if on cue, found her as well. She stood up, her face a mask of serene, heartbreaking composure. I am announcing, Matteo declared, the establishment of the Isabella Quinn Literacy Fund. It will be managed by the City Philanthropic Trust, with a legally mandated overhead of 5%. And I will be personally asking the Attorney Bellaral's office to take a very, very close look at where Mr. Cole's administrative fees have been going. It was over. Brendan's career, his reputation, his life. It was all over. Matteo Hawthorne set the microphone down on the lectern, the thud echoing the final nail in Brendan's coffin. He walked off the stage, not to his own table, but to the center of the room, where he met Isabella. He took her hand, and, as the entire room watched, the mayor, the press, the donors, Matteo Hawthorne led his fiancée out of the ballroom, leaving Brendan Cole alone on the stage, drowning in the silence, his world collapsing around him in a spectacular, million-dollar implosion. Brendan stumbled off the stage, his legs like jelly. The room was a blur of hostile, shocked faces. People were standing up, whispering and leaving. Not just leaving, but fleeing, as if proximity to him was a contagious disease. "That's a lie!" he shouted to the retreating back of a city councilman. "A slanderous lie!" The man just hurried away. He saw Lauren. She was not by the door. She was standing near the bar, her red dress a beacon of danger. Her arms were crossed, and her face was a terrifying pale mask. She was talking, rapidly, into her phone. "Lauren," he cried, pushing his way through the crowd. "Lauren, you have to help me. Call our lawyer. Call my publicist." Lauren snapped her phone shut and looked at him. Her eyes, which he had always thought were a warm brown, looked black and empty. "My publicist, Brendan," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Not our publicist. I just fired her, and I just hired Paul Adler." Brendan recoiled. "Paul Adler? The divorce attorney? The shark?" "He's the best," Lauren said with a shrug. "And I don't want to be associated with you when the press gets here, which," she added, glancing at her watch, "should be in about 3 minutes. Matteo Hawthorne's press team is famously efficient." "Lauren, you can't." Brendan grabbed her arm. "We're married, in sickness and in health." "This isn't sickness, Brendan. This is fraud," she spat, ripping her arm away. "You told me the accounting was creative, not indictable. You lied to me. I did it for us," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "The penthouse, the trips, that necklace." "And I thank you for them," Lauren said. She unclasped the diamond necklace he had given her and held it in her palm. "It's lovely, but it's not a legal defense. Please, baby, we can fight this. I can fight this. But I need you." Lauren looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. She saw a weak, terrified man, sweating through a $5,000 tuxedo, his eyes wide with the panic of a trapped animal. He was no longer the king. He was a jester, and she was not going to be a jester's queen. "No, Brendan," she said, her voice final. "You don't need me. You need a miracle, and I'm fresh out." She took the massive engagement ring from her finger. She didn't throw it. She didn't drop it. She placed it deliberately in the breast pocket of his tuxedo jacket. "This," she said, patting his chest, "should cover the first hour of your criminal defense lawyer's retainer. Looks like you're the one who's nothing, after all." She turned, her red dress swishing, and walked away. She didn't run. She glided, head held high, already scanning the room, her mind calculating her next move, her next target. Brendan Cole was left alone, utterly and completely alone. He looked around the empty ballroom, the half-eaten food, the abandoned glasses of champagne, the banner with his face on it. It was a graveyard. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He heard a noise and looked up. It was Isabella. She and Matteo hadn't left. They were standing in the service hallway, just watching. Isabella's face was not triumphant. It was sad. Brendan felt a flicker of hope, pity. He could work with pity. "Bella," he whispered, taking a step toward her. "Bella, you see, she left me. Just like that. After everything we built." Isabella said nothing. Matteo stepped forward. "A word of advice, Cole. Don't speak to her ever again." "You did this!" Brendan shrieked, his last shred of dignity evaporating. "You ruined me. She put you up to this. She's a vindictive, money-grubbing—" "Careful." Matteo's voice was deathly quiet, but it echoed in the empty room. "The next words out of your mouth will determine whether my lawyers just take your money, or if they take your liberty." Brendan's mouth snapped shut. "You ruined yourself, Brendan," Isabella said, her voice clear and strong. It wasn't shaky like it used to be. It was firm. "You did it the day you decided that people were just tools for you to use. You did it to me, and you did it to Lauren, and you did it to thousands of children who needed those books." She turned to Matteo. "I'm ready to go." "Isabella, wait!" Brendan cried, a final, desperate plea. I still love you. I made a mistake. It was always you." Isabella paused at the door. She looked back at him, a man in a ruined tuxedo in a ruined ballroom. "I know, Brendan," she said. "Your mistake wasn't leaving me. Your mistake was thinking I was weak. You didn't leave me because you thought I was nothing. You left me because you were terrified that I was everything." She turned and walked out of the ballroom, out of the hotel, and out of his life. Forever. The door swung shut, leaving Brendan Cole in the darkness, with only the consequences for company. Their story was not a whirlwind. It was not a fairy tale, not a sudden, passionate collision. It was a blueprint. It had been built slowly, meticulously, piece by piece, with a foundation of solid rock. It began 6 months after the divorce, when Isabella was at her absolute nadir. The last page, the small, struggling bookstore she had poured her entire settlement into, was not a sanctuary. It was an anchor, pulling her under. The smell of old paper and ink, a scent she had once loved, now just smelled like dust and failure. The numbers in her ledger were a constant, bleeding red. Brendan's parting words, "You'll be begging me to take you back," were a daily haunting. To keep the store's lights on, she had taken the catering job. It was a profound, silent humiliation. Every weekend, she would trade her comfortable jeans for a stiff, black and white polyester uniform that chafed her skin and her dignity. She would spend hours on her feet, smiling until her cheeks ached, offering canapés to people who looked through her as if she were part of the furniture. This, she knew, was the exact scenario Brendan had gleefully predicted. On a rainy, bleak Tuesday afternoon, the shop was empty. She was in the back room, hunched over a stack of invoices, trying to find a mathematical error that would magically give her more money, when the bell over the front door chimed. She didn't hear it. "Excuse me?" The voice was deep, and it startled her so badly she jumped, dropping a pen that rolled under the desk. "I'm so sorry, I didn't—" She trailed off as she emerged. The man standing by the history section was out of place. He didn't fit the profile of her usual clientele. He was wearing a simple grey Henley and dark jeans, but the cut of the clothes, the understated leather of his watch, all spoke of a quiet, significant wealth. He was looking at the staff picks wall, his attention fixed on her own handwritten note for a dense history of Renaissance Florence. You liked this one?" he asked, pointing to the book. His voice was low, and he didn't look at her with the impatient air of a customer, but with genuine curiosity. Yes," Isabella said, brushing dust from her knees, suddenly self-conscious. It's fascinating. It's a brilliant look at Brunelleschi's dome. Most people just get the technical aspects wrong, or they only focus on the art. This author, he understands both. The art and the engineering. The sheer force of will it took. The man smiled. It wasn't a flash of teeth. It was a slow, genuine smile that transformed his severe face and lit his grey eyes. He does, doesn't he? Most people focus on the Medici. They forget it was the artisans, the thinkers who built the city's soul, the ones who looked at an impossible hole in a roof and saw a masterpiece. He looked back at her, his gaze direct. "You're an engineer, then? An architect?" Isabella laughed, a small, rusty sound. "No, just a librarian. Or I used to be. Now I just sell books." "You don't just sell them," he said, tapping her handwritten note. "You understand them." They talked for 2 hours. They talked about art, about architecture, about the smell of old books and the specific ink used in 19th century maps. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask a single personal question. He just listened. He bought the book, paid in cash, and left. He came back the next week, and the week after. He was just Matt. He was, he said, a consultant who travelled a lot. He loved her bookstore. "It's quiet," he'd said, running a hand over the spine of a novel. "It feels real. My life is full of noise. This is the opposite." He became her Tuesday regular. Their conversations were a lifeline. He saw her. Not as a divorcee or a failure, but as Isabella. He saw her passion, her fierce intelligence. He saw her running the reading group for the neighborhood kids on Saturdays, using her own money to buy them juice and cookies, her face animated as she read "Where the Wild Things Are with All the Voices." He never pried, never offered pity, never crossed the line. He was simply safe. The day she had to take the MoMA catering gig, she had to close the bookstore early. He was there, waiting at the door, holding a copy of a new biography. "You're closing?" he asked, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. The shame was so acute she could barely breathe. She couldn't meet his gaze. I have an evening event," she'd said, the lie tasting like ash. His eyes drifted to the cheap, black and white server's uniform, hanging in a clear plastic garment bag on the hook by the door. He saw it. He saw the cheap, sensible shoes she'd tucked underneath it. A flicker of something crossed his face. Anger? No, it was colder. It was a quiet, glacial disapproval. But it wasn't for her. He didn't say a word. He just nodded. "Well, I'll see you next week, Isabella." That night was the gala. The night she'd felt invisible. A ghost in a polyester uniform, her feet aching, her soul bruised. The night she'd been serving champagne to a blowhard politician and had overheard the man in the simple, impeccably tailored dark suit. That's a 1948 Patek Philippe. And the shock, the vertigo, when his eyes, his familiar grey eyes, had met hers. "You're Isabella from the bookstore," he'd said, after their exchange about the Picasso. "You're Matt from the bookstore," she'd replied, her heart hammering. "My name is Matteo Hawthorne," he'd said simply. "And I don't want you serving champagne. I want you in my boardroom. You're the smartest person I've met in a decade. I'm starting a new acquisitions fund. I want you to run it." She'd thought it was a joke, a cruel, elaborate joke. It wasn't. He hadn't just given her a job. He had given her back her life. He sent her to Florence, to Paris, to London. "Go find me beautiful things," he'd said. "Find me the lost art. Find me the pieces with soul." And as she'd rebuilt her confidence, as the Isabella who understood art and engineering had re-emerged from the shell of Bella, the broken ex-wife, he had patiently, respectfully, shown her his own soul. He wasn't a playboy. He was a workaholic, a genius who was deeply, painfully shy. "They all look at me," he'd told her one night over dinner in Rome, on a quiet terrace overlooking the Forum. "They look at me, and they see a walking bank vault. Their eyes, it's like they're calculating. You saw a guy who liked books about architecture. You are," she'd said, smiling. "I am," he'd agreed, "but I'm also lonely." That was the night, emboldened by the wine and the safety she felt with him, that she finally told him the full story of Brendan. Not just the divorce, the theft, the stealing of her foundation, her idea, her work, the way he'd taken her passion for children's literacy and twisted it into a monument to his own ego. Matteo had just listened, his glass of wine untouched. As she spoke, his face grew colder, harder, until he looked like the marble statues in the square below. When she finished, he didn't offer sympathy. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He said, his voice a low, lethal hiss, "He didn't just break your heart, Isabella. He committed identity theft." That single phrase had healed something in her. He understood. He didn't see it as a messy breakup. He saw it for the crime it was. It was 2 weeks later that his legal team, unbidden, brought him the audit. "It's worse than you thought," his chief counsel had said. "The man is a common criminal. It's blatant, flagrant fraud." Matteo had looked at the files. He had looked at Isabella, who was sleeping peacefully in the next room, exhausted from a successful trip to the London art auctions. And he had made a plan. The engagement wasn't a strategy. It wasn't part of the plan. That was all him. He'd proposed a month before the gala invitation ever arrived. He'd done it in her bookstore. She'd arrived on a Tuesday, just like always, only to find a "sold" sign in the window. Her blood had run cold. She'd stumbled inside, thinking the landlord had finally foreclosed, only to find the store empty, save for one man. Matteo, standing in the center of the room, surrounded by thousands of roses. "It's sold," he said, his voice soft. "To me. I bought the building. It's yours, Isabella. It will never be threatened again. It will always be your safe place." She had burst into tears, and he had pulled her close. Then he'd gotten down on one knee. He'd opened a box to reveal the flawless, emerald-cut diamond. "They say this cut is cold," he'd said, his voice thick with an emotion she'd never heard from him. "But I see it as clear. Utterly, perfectly clear. Like you. You are the clearest, most honest thing in my life, Isabella. I don't want to just acquire art with you. I want to build a life with you. Marry me." She had wept, and she had said yes. So, when Brendan's cream-colored, arrogant invitation arrived a month later, she was a different woman. But the sight of his handwriting still made her hand tremble. Her first instinct was to throw it in the fire. "No," Matteo had said, his hand covering hers. He looked at the invitation with a chilling lack of emotion. "Don't. This is not an invitation. This is a summons. He's trying to close the loop, to prove to himself that he won, that you're broken." "I don't want to go," she'd whispered, the old fear still a phantom in her veins. "I know." He'd lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his steady, steel-grey eyes. "But my love, he stole your name. He stole your work. You can't let him keep it." He stood up, pulling her to her feet, his hands on her shoulders. "We will go. But we won't go as his victims. We'll go as his judges. It's time to close this chapter, Isabella. It's time to take your name back." And so they had. The dress, the jewels, the auction, it was all theatre. A grand, beautiful and terrible piece of theatre, designed for an audience of one. It was designed to give Isabella her power back, not by getting a billionaire, but by being the woman a billionaire was lucky and smart enough to have found reading a history book in a dusty little shop. The scent of fresh paint, new carpet, and sugary cupcakes hung in the air. It was a far cry from the stale perfume and cold marble of the Grandelsia Hotel. 1 year had passed. The Isabella Quinn Literacy Centre was not a monument to wealth. It was a testament to survival. It stood on a busy city corner in the heart of the neighborhood that needed it most. Its walls were glass, letting sunlight pour in, illuminating the brightly colored, child-sized furniture and the thousands of brand-new books that lined the shelves. Isabella Hawthorne stood to the side, her hands resting on the prominent 7-month curve of her belly. She watched as children, dozens of them, a joyous, thundering herd, ran in to explore. Their sneakers squeaked on the polished wood floors, and their laughter was the only soundtrack. This was what the Cole Foundation was supposed to be. This was the work she had started, the dream Brendan had twisted into a vanity project. Now, it was real. It was hers. Matteo moved through the crowd, not as a titan, but as a shadow. He had been there all morning, adjusting microphones, helping stack cupcakes, and quietly directing his own security team to blend in as volunteers. He wore a simple cashmere sweater, but he was more imposing than any man in a tuxedo. He saw her watching him and smiled, a private, intimate gesture that crinkled the corners of his grey eyes. He made his way to her side, handing her a bottle of water. "How are you feeling?" he murmured, his hand coming to rest on her back, just below her shoulder. "The mayor is looking at you. He's terrified you'll ask him for more funding." Isabella laughed, a light, easy sound. "Let him be. He'll get his photo op." She leaned into his touch. "It's perfect, Matt. It's the last page. But this time we did it right." "No, my love," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You did it right the first time. The world just caught up." A moment later, the city councilwoman who had championed the project tapped the microphone. "And now, it is my distinct honor to introduce the woman who made all of this possible, the founder of this beautiful center, and the heart of this new community initiative, Mrs. Isabella Hawthorne." The applause was warm and genuine, a mix of parents, local leaders, and children who were just happy to be there. Isabella walked to the small podium, her heart full. She looked out at the faces, not the cold, assessing society faces of the gala, but the hopeful, eager faces of a real community. "Thank you, Councilwoman," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you all for coming. This center isn't about me. It's about a simple, powerful idea. It's about the first page." She paused, her hand drifting back to her belly, a gesture of unconscious protection and promise. "For a long time, I thought my own book was finished. I thought I was on the last page of a story that didn't end well." She looked at Matteo, who was watching her with an expression of such profound, unguarded love that it almost stole her breath. "But I learned that it wasn't the end. It was just the end of a chapter. A painful chapter, yes, but not the end. The story is just beginning. It's beginning for me, for my family. And now, because of all of you, it's beginning for every child who walks through these doors." She gestured to the shelves, laden with books. "This is not just a library. It is a building full of first pages, 1,000,000 new beginnings. Welcome to the center. Welcome to your first page." The crowd erupted. She stepped back, her eyes misting, as the councilwoman produced a giant pair of scissors and a bright blue ribbon. Isabella cut the ribbon, and the sound of the snip felt like the most final, satisfying sound she had ever heard. Later, As kids scrambled for books and parents toured the new computer lab, a young, eager woman with a local press badge approached her. "Mrs. Hawthorne, a question." That was a beautiful speech. "Thank you," Isabella said, accepting a cupcake from a passing volunteer. It's an amazing turnaround," the reporter said, her pen poised. "A year ago, well, the whole city was talking about the Cole Foundation's collapse. And now, this." Isabella knew what she was asking. "You're asking about Brendan Cole?" The reporter blushed. "Yes. The public, they never really got the full story. Just the court filings." Isabella took a sip of water, her expression serene. She was not the same woman who had trembled at the sight of an invitation. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice calm and factual, "faced a federal investigation. The audit my husband's team provided to the attorney Billionaire was thorough. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. My new foundation, this foundation, was the first in line of his creditors, ensuring that what little money was left was returned to the cause he stole from. He is currently serving a 7-year sentence in a minimum security federal prison." The reporter was scribbling furiously. And his wife, Lauren Sinclair?" A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Isabella's lips. "Ms. Sinclair," she said, stressing the name, "was not charged. Her divorce was finalized, citing irreconcilable differences, before his indictment. Her lawyers were very efficient. I believe she is now living in the south of France. She's engaged to a 90-year-old oil baron. Some people, it seems, never change." The reporter looked up, her eyes wide with the sheer, karmic weight of it all. "That's incredible, after everything he did. To you, to the city. Can I ask, do you forgive him?" This was the question, the one she had asked herself in the quiet hours of the night. Isabella was silent for a long moment. She looked across the room, past the reporter, past the crowd. She saw Matteo on his knees on the colorful alphabet rug, a small, laughing girl, trying to braid his hair while he showed her a picture book. She felt the tiny, fluttering kick of her daughter inside her, a new life waiting to begin. She turned back to the reporter, her eyes clear and bright. "I don't think about him," she said, and it was the most honest, final and devastating truth. "He's not a part of my story anymore," she elaborated, her voice soft. "He's not the villain, or a tragedy, or a mistake I need to forgive. He's just irrelevant. He's not even a footnote. He's just the last page of a book I've already finished, and I'm starting a new one." She smiled at the reporter, a kind, final smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I promised I'd read Where the Wild Things Are to the pre-K group. They've been waiting." She walked away from the past, leaving the reporter with her perfect, closed-loop ending. She walked across the sunlit room toward the laughter and toward her husband. Matteo looked up as she approached, his face softening. "You're late, Mrs. Hawthorne. We're about to start a rebellion." "The Queen is never late," Isabella said, tapping him on the nose. "Everyone else is just early." He helped her settle into the small, comfortable reading chair. He handed her the well-loved, hardcover book and sat on the floor at her feet, surrounded by a semicircle of rapt, expectant little faces. Isabella opened the book. She took a deep breath, smiled, and began. The night Max wore his wolf suit. And so, the king was checkmated, and the queen, who he thought was just a pawn, ended up taking the entire board. Brendan Cole learned the hard way that you should never, ever underestimate the woman you discard. He thought she was nothing without him. But the truth was, he was nothing without her. Her revenge wasn't loud. It was precise. It wasn't about the money. It was about the justice. Isabella didn't just get a billionaire, she got her name back. And she built an empire of her own, one built on kindness and a future he could never be a part of. What did you think of Brendan's downfall? Was it satisfying? Was Matteo the perfect partner, or was his move at the gala too brutal? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening to this full-length drama. If you love stories about karmic retribution, sweet revenge, and powerful women, then you are in the right place. Make sure you like this video, share it with a friend who loves drama, and most importantly, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We have a brand new one coming for you next week.
He handed her a check for $10,000 of final insult after 10 years of marriage and told her she was aged out of his life. Julian genuinely believed that without his money and his status, his ex-wife Sophie would crumble. He expected her to fade into obscurity crying in a small apartment while he paraded his 23-year-old mistress through the Hamptons. He was wrong. 6 months later, on a humid night in Monaco, Julian stood on a crowded dock and watched the impossible happen. He didn't just see Sophie survive, he watched her ascend. And the man waiting for her on the deck of the world's most exclusive Mega-Yacht wasn't just rich, he was the one man Julian terrified of. This is the story of the ultimate revenge. The conference room at Skadden, Arps, Slate, Mager and Flom on 4th Avenue was freezing. It was a deliberate tactic, of course. Sophie knew that. They kept the air conditioning blasting to make the weaker party shiver to make them want to sign, just to get out of the cold. Sophie sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the mahogany table. She wasn't shivering. She was wearing a 3-year-old beige cashmere sweater from Loro Piana, one of the last gifts Julian had bought her before he stopped caring, and she looked at the man sitting across from her. Julian looked like $1 million, literally. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit from Savile Row, his hair perfectly coiffed, and on his wrist sat a rose-gold Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. He didn't look at her. He was too busy scrolling through his phone, likely texting her. Bella. The 24-year-old influencer he'd moved into their Tribeca penthouse 3 days ago. "Let's wrap this up," Julian said, finally dropping his phone onto the table with a heavy thud. "I have a flight to Aspen at 3. Sophie, look, my lawyers have been generous, extremely generous." His lead attorney, a shark-like man named Arthur Penhaligon, slid a thick document across the table. "As discussed, Mrs. Vance, the prenuptial agreement you signed 10 years ago is ironclad. However, Mr. Vance is offering a goodwill payment of $50,000 to assist with your transition." $50,000. They had been married for a decade. Sophie had dropped out of her master's program at Sotheby's Institute of Art to manage Julian's life. She had hosted his dinners, charmed his investors from Goldman Sachs, decorated his 3 properties, and nursed him through his bout with pneumonia in 2019. She had built the social network that allowed his hedge fund, Vance Capital, to thrive. And now she was being fired. That's what this felt like. A severance package for a redundant employee. "You're keeping the apartment?" Sophie asked. Her voice was quiet, scratchy. "Sophie, be realistic." Julian sighed, finally making eye contact. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth she remembered from their college days. "You can't afford the maintenance fees on the Tribeca place. I'm doing you a favor. Bella, well, I need the space. We're entertaining a lot more." He said her name on purpose. Bella. A twist of the knife. "And the house in the Hamptons." "Mine," Julian said sharply. "Purchased through the LLC. You know this?" Sophie looked down at the paper. $50,000. It wouldn't even cover a deposit on a decent apartment in Manhattan these days. She was 36 years old. Her resume had a 10-year gap. Her friends were actually Julian's friends' wives of his business partners who would drop her the second the ink was dry. Arthur the lawyer uncapped a Mont Blanc pen and held it out. "If we go to trial, Sophie, we will crush you. We will expose the mental health episodes." Sophie froze. She had seen a therapist twice after her miscarriage 3 years ago. Julian had called it her breakdown. Now he was weaponizing her grief. She looked at Julian. He was smirking, a tiny, imperceptible lift of the corner of his mouth. He wanted a scene. He wanted her to scream, to cry, to beg. He wanted to tell his friends later over scotch at the Soho house that his crazy ex-wife had to be dragged out by security. He wanted validation that he was the prize. Sophie took a deep breath. She reached out and took the pen. "Okay," she whispered. Julian blinked. "Okay." "I just want it to be over, Julian." She signed her name. Sophie Thorne. She dropped the Vance immediately. Julian looked almost disappointed by her lack of fight. He snatched the papers back, checking the signature. "Smart girl. You always were pragmatic, mostly." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Look, Soph, don't take this the wrong way. You're a great woman. You stopped evolving. I need someone who matches my trajectory." "I understand," Sophie said, standing up. She picked up her old leather tote bag. "Take the check," Julian said, flicking a piece of paper toward her. "Buy yourself a vacation. Go to, I don't know, Ohio, visit your parents." "My parents are dead, Julian," she said softly. "Right. Well, whatever." He checked his watch. "I gotta run. Bella is waiting in the car." He walked out without looking back. Arthur the lawyer gave her a pitying nod and followed. Sophie stood alone in the multi-million-dollar conference room. She walked to the window, looking out over the gray New York skyline. She felt light, terrifyingly light. She had no husband, no home, no money, and no career, but she also had no secrets. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a small black notebook. It wasn't a diary, it was a ledger. For 10 years, Sophie had managed the household expenses, but she had also listened. She sat at the dinners where Julian bragged. She knew about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that Vance Capital hadn't declared to the IRS. She knew about the consulting fees paid to the senator's son to get regulatory approval. She hadn't used it in the divorce. That would have been blackmail, and Julian would have buried her in litigation for years. She didn't want his money. She wanted him to think she was weak. She wanted him to stop watching her. "Matches your trajectory," she whispered to the empty room. She put the notebook back in her bag. She wasn't going to Ohio. She was going to get her life back, and she was going to start by reclaiming the one thing he couldn't take her eye for value. 6 months later. The humidity in New York was oppressive, but inside the gallery of Henri Duval in Chelsea, the air was crisp and smelled of lemon oil and old canvas. Sophie was on her knees, carefully removing a layer of varnish from a 17th-century frame. Her hands were stained with solvents. She was wearing paint-splattered coveralls, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She was making $22 an hour. It was a far cry from the Hamptons galas, but Sophie had never been happier. Henri, an eccentric elderly Frenchman who had been one of the few people from her old life to return her calls, had given her a chance. "You have the eye, chérie," Henri had told her when she begged for a job. "But you have been blind for 10 years. She was learning to see again. She lived in a studio apartment in Queens that smelled of curry from the restaurant downstairs. She took the subway. She ate ramen. And every night she studied the art market. She tracked auction results from Christie's and Sotheby's. She read about emerging artists. Julian was everywhere, unfortunately. He was on the cover of Forbes, listed as a titan of industry. The tabloid's page 6 specifically loved documenting his romance with Bella. Julian Vance and fiancée Bella Sterling spotted shopping for engagement rings at Tiffany & Company flagship. Julian Vance purchases $40 million Mega-Yacht, dubbing it the Bella V. Sophie read the news on her lunch break, eating a yogurt. It stung, but the pain was dulling. It was becoming fuel. "Sophie," Henri called out from the front of the gallery, "we have a VIP client coming in 10 minutes. I need you to hide the solvents and look presentable, or vanish." "Who is it?" Sophie asked, wiping her hands. "A proxy buyer, representing someone from Europe, looking for the Turner Seascape." Sophie nodded. The Turner was the gallery's prized possession listed at $4.5 million. She quickly tidied the back room. She didn't have time to change, so she decided to vanish. She grabbed her bag and headed for the back exit. As she opened the heavy steel door to the alley, she heard the front chime ring. A voice drifted through, deep, accented, polite, but commanding. "Monsieur Deval, I trust the piece is ready for inspection." Sophie paused. She knew that voice. Not personally, but she had heard it on CNBC in interviews. It wasn't the proxy. It was the buyer himself. She peeked through the crack in the door. Standing there looking at the painting with intensity was Adrian Thorne, no relation to her maiden name, just a cosmic irony. Adrian was a ghost, a tech mogul who had sold his AI infrastructure company to Google for $12 billion and then disappeared. He was known for two things: being ruthlessly private and having a taste for things that were impossible to get. He was taller than Julian, broader, with silver-flecked beard and eyes that looked like they could scan a balance sheet in a microsecond. "It is beautiful," Adrian said. But, Henri looked nervous. "The provenance," Adrian said. "There is a gap between 1940 and 1946. Given the era, I cannot risk purchasing a piece that might be looted art. My reputation cannot sustain that," Henri stammered. "I assure you, Mr. Thorne—" "The gap isn't a gap," Sophie said. She hadn't meant to speak. It just came out. She stepped out from the back room, still in her dirty coveralls. Adrian Thorne turned. His eyes swept over her, not with the dismissive look Julian used, but with a calculating curiosity. "Excuse me." Henri looked horrified. "Sophie, please leave us." "No." Adrian raised a hand. "Let her speak. You know about the provenance." Sophie took a breath. She walked over to the painting. "The gap in the paperwork exists because this painting wasn't in a gallery during the war. It was in the basement of the Château de Chambord, hidden by the curator along with the Mona Lisa to protect it from the Nazis. If you look at the back of the frame under the sublayer, there should be a faint charcoal mark, a double C. That was the code used by the resistance transport teams." Silence filled the room. Adrian looked at Henri. "Is this true?" I have never looked under the sublayer," Henri admitted. "Do it," Adrian commanded. "Now." Henri carefully took the painting down. With trembling hands and Sophie's guidance, they peeled back the protective backing paper. There, faint but undeniable, was a charcoal CC. Adrian Thorne let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. He looked at the painting with renewed reverence. Then he turned to Sophie. "You are a restorer." "I'm learning," Sophie said. "I used to be an advisor, in a past life. You have an incredible eye for detail. And you know history. What is your name?" "Sophie." "Just Sophie. For now." Adrian studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. "I am looking for an acquisition curator. Someone who doesn't just look at the price tag, but looks at the bones of the thing. My current team is sycophantic. They tell me what I want to hear." He pulled a card from his pocket. It wasn't paper. It was heavy black metal with gold embossing. "I am hosting a viewing party in Monaco next month. It is the weekend of the Grand Prix. I am unveiling a collection. I want you to come. I want you to assess the collection before I reveal it to the public. If you find any other hidden marks, I will hire you on the spot. Annual salary starts at $500,000. Sophie stared at the card. Monaco, the Grand Prix. It was the center of the universe for the super-rich in May. I can't afford to get to Monaco," she said honestly. She wasn't going to pretend. Adrian smiled. It transformed his face, making him look younger, dangerous, but charming. I'll send a plane. Teterboro Airport. Friday at 8:00 a.m. Don't be late, Sophie. He walked out, leaving the scent of sandalwood and absolute power in his wake. Henri looked at Sophie, his mouth agape. Mon Dieu, do you know who that was? Yes, Sophie said, clutching the metal card. That was my way out. But she didn't know the half of it. Because Monaco during the Grand Prix wasn't just about art. It was about status. And where there was status, there was Julien. The plane wasn't just a plane. It was a Gulfstream G650ER painted in matte black. And she was the only passenger. Sophie spent the 7-hour flight sipping sparkling water and reading the dossier Adrian's assistant had emailed her. She wasn't going as a guest. She was going as a consultant. This was work. She told herself that repeatedly. She wasn't going to find a Prince Charming. She was going to secure a career so she never had to depend on a man like Julien again. When she landed in Nice, a helicopter was waiting to shuttle her to Monaco. The view coming in was breathtaking: the azure water, the winding roads, the density of wealth packed into the tiny principality. She was dropped off at the Hôtel de Paris, the most legendary hotel in Monte Carlo. Mr. Thorne has arranged a suite for you, the concierge said, bowing low. And he suggested you might need this for the evening's event. He handed her a large white box tied with a black ribbon. Up in her suite, which was larger than her entire apartment in Queens, Sophie opened the box. Inside was a dress. It was a vintage Alexander McQueen black silk structured in severe, yet incredibly sexy. It was armor. There was a note. Wear this. The sharks are circling tonight. A. Sophie did her hair in a sleek high ponytail and put on the dress. It fit perfectly. She applied red lipstick, a color Julien had always forbidden because he said it looked cheap. Tonight it looked lethal. The event was being held at the Oceanographic Museum, a stunning building on the cliffside. Sophie arrived alone. The paparazzi were screaming names, flashes popping like strobe lights. She kept her head high and walked past them. She didn't matter to them, not yet. Inside the room was dripping with diamonds and champagne. It was the Billionaire set. Tech tycoons, oil heirs, Russian oligarchs. Sophie took a glass of champagne and moved to the edges, scanning the art on the walls. It was an impressive collection, Modigliani's Basquiat's. Adrian had taste. Well, well, I thought I smelled cheap perfume. The voice made Sophie's blood turn to ice. She turned slowly. Julien was standing there. He looked tan-polished and slightly drunk. He was holding a tumbler of whiskey. Hanging on his arm was Bella. Bella looked stunning, undeniably. She was wearing a sheer, glittering gold dress that left little to the imagination. She looked at Sophie with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Sophie," Bella chirped. "Oh my God, what are you doing here? Did you sneak in?" Julien sneered. "Who are you with? Did you pick up a waiter, or maybe you're working catering?" He laughed at his own joke. "Actually, that makes sense. You always were good at serving people." Sophie tightened her grip on her glass. "I'm here on business, Julien." "Business?" Julien scoffed. "What business? You're a housewife, Sophie. A retired housewife." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Look, it's embarrassing that you're here. Really, it looks desperate. Stalking me to Monaco. It's sad." "I didn't know you were here, Julien," Sophie said calmly, though her heart was hammering. "Bullshit. Everyone knows Vance Capital is sponsoring the after-party on the yacht. Look, do yourself a favor. Go back to the hotel, pack your bags, and go home. You don't belong in this world anymore. You were a passenger, Sophie. The ride is over." Bella giggled. "Babe, don't be mean. Maybe she can grab a gift bag on the way out." Tears pricked Sophie's eyes. Not of sadness, but of rage. Pure, hot rage. He still had the power to make her feel small. "Is there a problem here?" The crowd seemed to part. Adrian Thorne stepped through. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He didn't look at Julian. He looked only at Sophie. "Adrian," Julian said, his voice suddenly shifting from bullying to fawning. "Mr. Thorne, I'm Julian Vance. We met at Davos last year. Big fan of your—" Adrian ignored him completely. He stepped up to Sophie and gently placed a hand on the small of her back. "Sophie," Adrian said, his voice low and intimate. "I was looking for you. The curator from the Louvre is dying to meet you. He wants to discuss your theory on the Turner." Julian froze. "Curator." Adrian finally turned his cold gaze to Julian. "And you are—" I'm Julian Vance, Sophie's ex-husband." "Ah," Adrian said. His face showed zero emotion. "The ex-husband." He looked Julian up and down, then glanced at Bella, then back to Julian. "I see." It was the most insulting "I see" in history. It implied that Julian had downgraded massively. "Sophie is my guest of honor," Adrian said, "and my new head of acquisitions. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business to discuss with people who actually matter." He guided Sophie away. As they walked away, Sophie could feel Julian's eyes boring into her back. She heard him whisper furiously to Bella, "What the hell just happened?" Sophie looked up at Adrian. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Adrian murmured. "I just hate bullies, and I hate men who don't know the value of what they're holding. But Sophie, the night isn't over. Julian is going to try to corner you again. He's a narcissist. He can't handle what just happened." "I know," Sophie said. "Good." Adrian stopped and turned her to face him. "Because I have a proposition. Julian is trying to get an allocation in my new venture fund. He's desperate for it. He's leveraged himself to the hilt to buy that yacht and keep up this lifestyle. If you want, we can break him." Sophie looked at Adrian. "Break him? I can deny his allocation. I can blacklist him from the deal. His investors will panic. His stock will tank. But I only do it if you give the word. It's your call." Sophie looked across the room. Julian was yelling at a waiter, his face red. Bella was looking at her phone, bored. "Not yet," Sophie said. A plan was forming in her mind. "Denying him is too easy. I don't want him to just lose money. I want him to lose his pride." Adrian smiled, a wolfish grin. "I think I'm going to enjoy working with you, Sophie. Tomorrow is the yacht party. Everyone will be there, including Julian. Meet me at the dock at 9 p.m. And Sophie." "Yes." "Bring the notebook." Sophie stopped breathing. "How do you know about the notebook?" "I know everything, Sophie. That's why I hired you. You're the only person who knows where the bodies are buried." The morning sun over the Mediterranean was blinding, but the blackout curtains in Adrian's suite at the Hotel de Paris were drawn tight. The room hummed with the quiet whir of high-end electronics. Sophie sat at a glass table, the black notebook open in front of her. Adrian stood behind her, looking over her shoulder. He wasn't touching her, but his presence was a heavy electric weight. "Walk me through it again," Adrian said. His voice was all business now. Sophie ran her finger down a column of dates and numbers scrawled in her handwriting. 3 years ago, Julian's firm Vance Capital was struggling. His returns were flat and investors were pulling out to move to index funds. He was desperate. Then suddenly he made a massive bet against a pharmaceutical company called Corello Pharma. "I remember Corello," Adrian said, walking around the table to pour 2 espressos. "They were developing a revolutionary Alzheimer's drug. The Phase 2 trials looked promising. The stock was soaring. Betting against them was suicide." "Exactly," Sophie said. "Unless you knew for a fact the FDA was going to reject the Phase 3 trial data before it was public." Adrian placed a cup in front of her. "And he knew. He was sleeping with the lead compliance officer's assistant at the FDA, a woman named Sarah. He bought her a condo in D.C. under a shell company. She fed him the rejection data 2 days before the press release." Sophie tapped the page. He shorted the stock with 80% of the fund's liquidity, leveraged 5-1. When the news broke, Corello's stock dropped 70% in 10 minutes. Julian made $40 million in an afternoon. It saved the firm. It bought the penthouse. It bought the Hamptons house. And it's illegal, Adrian said softly. Insider trading, market manipulation, jail time. It's not just illegal, Adrian. It's traceable. I have the dates of his business trips to D.C. that align perfectly with the trade. And she flipped to the back of the notebook. I have the account number for the shell company in the British Virgin Islands that pays the mortgage on Sarah's condo. He was sloppy. He used his personal email to set up the wire transfers, thinking he deleted the thread. I recovered it from the trash folder when I was syncing his iPad. Adrian picked up the notebook. He looked at it like it was a loaded weapon. Why didn't you use this during the divorce? He asked, studying her face. Because I was scared, Sophie admitted, looking down at her coffee. Julian has friends in low places. Arthur, his lawyer. They terrified me. I thought if I tried to blackmail him, they'd make me disappear or frame me for something. I just wanted to survive. And now, Sophie looked up. Her eyes were dry and hard. Now I don't just want to survive. I want to balance the books. Adrian smiled. It was a terrifying smile. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Get me James Sterling at the Financial Times, Adrian said into the phone. And tell the legal team at the SEC Enforcement Division, the one we helped with the crypto fraud case, that I have a whistleblower package coming their way. Anonymous for now. He hung up and looked at Sophie. Tonight is the yacht party. Julian is hosting a gala on his boat, the Bella V. He's trying to close a $100 million round of funding from the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. If he closes that deal, he becomes too big to fail. He won't close it, Sophie said. No, he won't, because while he's playing captain on his rental yacht, you and I are going to steal the show, and then we're going to sink him. Adrian walked over to a garment rack that had been rolled into the room earlier that morning. He unzipped a garment bag. For tonight, he said. It wasn't black. It was a gown of liquid silver encrusted with thousands of tiny Swarovski crystals. It looked like moonlight woven into fabric. It was a custom Versace fresh from the atelier in Milan. Julian likes to treat you like you're invisible, Adrian said. Tonight you are going to be the brightest thing in the harbor. Tonight we make sure he sees exactly what he threw away. The Port Hercules harbor in Monaco at night is a theater of excess. The water reflects the lights of the casino and the high-rises, turning the bay into a kaleidoscope of gold and neon. The docks were crowded. Tourists were pressed against the railings trying to catch glimpses of celebrities. Julian Vance stood on the aft deck of the Bella V. It was a respectable yacht, 145 feet long, sleek white, built by Sunseeker. It cost him $300,000 to charter for the week, a sum he could barely afford, but he needed to project success. He was holding court with 3 men and Thobe's representatives from the Saudi Investment Fund. The returns are guaranteed, Julian was saying, his smile tight. Our algorithm is proprietary. We anticipate a 22% yield this year. Vance Capital is the future. Bella was standing next to him, looking bored, scrolling through Instagram. She tugged on his sleeve. Julian, the champagne is warm. Tell the crew to fix it. In a minute, babe, Julian hissed. He turned back to the investors. Gentlemen, if you'll just look at the prospectus. Suddenly, the loud, deep horn of a ship blasted across the harbor, vibrating the champagne glasses on the table. Every head on the dock turned. The tourists started screaming and pointing. Entering the harbor was a monster. It was a Giga-Yacht, easily 350 feet long. Its hull was painted a deep, menacing charcoal gray, almost black. It didn't look like a pleasure craft. It looked like a warship designed for a Bond villain. It towered over every other boat in the marina, making the Bella V look like a dinghy. What is that? Bella asked, her mouth open. That, one of the Saudi investors said, his voice filled with awe, is the Sovereign. It belongs to Adrian Thorne. It is rarely seen. It is magnificent. Julian felt a knot of jealousy tighten in his stomach. He hated Adrian Thorne. He hated that Thorne had humiliated him at the gala. The Sovereign maneuvered with impossible grace, its thrusters churning the water white. It docked directly opposite the Bella V, stealing Julian's view, stealing his air, stealing his audience. A ramp, a long, illuminated gangway lined with white LEDs began to lower from the side of the Sovereign. "Let's see who he's got with him," Julian muttered, taking a sip of his drink. "Probably some supermodels. Typical tech bro trash." The gangway touched the dock. Security guards in black suits flanked the entrance. Then a couple emerged. The man was Adrian Thorne, looking impeccable in a white tuxedo jacket. But no one was looking at him. They were looking at the woman on his arm. She was wearing a dress that seemed to be made of liquid mercury. It shimmered with every step. She wore diamonds at her throat that caught the harbor lights, a necklace that looked suspiciously like the Cartier Tutti Frutti piece that had sold at auction last month for $6 million. She walked with her head high, her posture regal, radiating a cold, untouchable beauty. Julian squinted. The woman looked familiar. The way she walked, the tilt of her head. She turned slightly to wave at the crowd, and the light hit her face. Julian dropped his glass. It shattered on the teak deck, splashing whiskey over his bespoke loafers. "Sophie," he whispered. Bella looked up. "What? That's Sophie." "Your ex-wife." Bella laughed nervously. "Don't be stupid. Sophie wears cardigans and shops at Target. That woman is wearing a dress that costs more than your car." But Julian knew. He felt it in his gut. Sophie and Adrian reached the bottom of the gangway. Instead of getting into a waiting limousine, they stopped. Adrian whispered something to her. Sophie smiled a genuine, dazzling smile that Julian hadn't seen in years, and nodded. They turned and walked along the dock. They were walking toward the Bella V. "They're coming here," the Saudi investor said, straightening his robe. "Mr. Thorne is coming here." Julian panicked. "Fix the mess," he yelled at a steward, pointing at the broken glass. "Bella, stand up straight." Sophie and Adrian stopped on the dock right below where Julian was standing on the deck of his rented boat. The height difference was symbolic. Julian was 10 feet above her, but he had never felt smaller. "Julian," Adrian called out. His voice carried easily over the water. "I hope we aren't interrupting your pitch." Julian gripped the railing. "Thorne, what do you want?" "I just wanted to introduce you to my new partner," Adrian said, gesturing to Sophie. Sophie looked up. She locked eyes with Julian. There was no fear in her eyes anymore. There was no longing. There was just pity. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice was clear and melodic. "Lovely boat. It's cozy." The crowd on the dock laughed. "Sophie," Julian stammered. "What are you doing? You're making a scene." "I'm not making a scene, Julian," she said, adjusting her $6 million necklace. "I'm making an acquisition. Adrian and I just finalized the purchase of the Corello Pharma patent portfolio. You remember Corello, don't you?" The color drained from Julian's face. "Corello." "Yes." Sophie continued, speaking loud enough for the Saudi investors to hear. "We're reopening the investigation into the data leak 3 years ago. We found some discrepancies in the trading logs." Julian felt the world tilt. She knew. "You're crazy," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're just a bitter ex-wife." "Am I?" Sophie asked. She reached into her small crystal clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it up. "I have the receipts, Julian. Literally. The Cayman transfers, the D.C. condo." She didn't explain further. She didn't have to. She simply tucked the paper back into her purse. "Enjoy your evening," she said. "I hear the SEC is very active in this time zone." She took Adrian's arm and they turned away, walking back toward the looming majestic shadow of the Sovereign. Julian stood frozen. The Saudi investors were looking at him. They were looking at his shaking hands. They were looking at the fear in his eyes. "Mr. Vance," the lead investor said, his tone icy, "I think we will postpone signing the agreement. We need to reassess our due diligence." "No." Julian spun around. "Wait. She's lying. She's mentally unstable. It's a ploy." But the investors were already walking toward the exit ramp. They didn't want to be anywhere near a man who had just been publicly marked for death by Adrian Thorne. The party on the Bella V died instantly. The guests, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, began to trickle away. No one wanted to be associated with the sinking ship. Julian stormed into the master cabin, slamming the door. He poured himself a drink, his hands trembling so badly the bottle rattled against the glass. "What was that?" Bella shrieked, following him in. "Why did the Saudis leave, Julian? You promised me that investment was a done deal. You promised we were buying the penthouse in Miami next week." "Shut up, Bella," Julian roared. He loosened his tie, gasping for air. "I need to think." His phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was Arthur, his lawyer in New York. It was 4:00 a.m. in New York. Lawyers didn't call at 4:00 a.m. unless the building was on burning. Julian answered. "Arthur, tell me you can fix this slander." "Julian, shut up and listen." Arthur's voice was panicked. "The FBI just raided the office." Julian dropped into a leather chair. "What?" "They have a warrant. Federal agents. They're seizing the servers. They're asking for the Corello file specifically." "Julian, who did you talk to?" "Who has the ledger?" "The ledger," Julian whispered. "Sophie." "Sophie!" Arthur screamed. "Your wife. You told me she knew nothing. You told me she was a decorate-the-house idiot. I thought she was." "Well, she just handed the DOJ a roadmap to your prison cell. And it gets worse, because the news of the raid just hit the Bloomberg terminal." "What does that mean?" "It means the banks are reacting. Goldman just pulled your prime brokerage line. They're issuing a margin call on the entire portfolio. You have 1 hour to post $40 million in cash collateral, or they liquidate your positions." "I don't have $40 million in cash," Julian yelled. "It's all tied up in the yacht, the houses, the private equity deals." "Then you're broke, Julian. You're done. I'm resigning as your counsel effective immediately. I'm not going down for aiding and abetting. Don't call me again." The line went dead. Julian stared at the phone. Another notification popped up. It was a push notification from Wall Street Journal. "Breaking Vance Capital raided by FBI in insider trading probe. Whistleblower links fund to FDA leaks." He looked up. Bella was reading the same notification on her phone. Her face was pale. She looked around the cabin at the expensive furniture, the champagne, the illusion of wealth. Then she looked at Julian, sweating and defeated, in the chair. "You're broke?" she asked, her voice small. It's a liquidity issue." Julian lied, desperate. "I just need a few days. Bella, baby, I need you to support me right now. We can fix this." Bella looked at him. The calculations were happening behind her eyes. She was 24. She had options. Being the girlfriend of an indicted fraudster was not on her vision board. "I can't be here," she said. "What? My brand?" she said, backing away. "I can't have my brand associated with federal crimes. I have sponsors, Julian." "Your brand?" Julian laughed hysterically. "I bought your brand. I bought your followers. I paid for everything you're wearing." "And now you can't pay for anything," she snapped. She grabbed her purse, a Hermes Birkin he had bought her last week. "I'm taking the tender to shore. I'm flying back to L.A. tonight." "Bella, wait." She didn't wait. The door slammed shut. Julian was alone. He stood up and stumbled out onto the deck. The harbor was quiet now. The party was over. The staff were silently cleaning up, casting nervous glances at him. He looked across the water. The Sovereign was still there, glowing like a dark jewel. On the top deck he could see two silhouettes leaning against the railing. He knew it was them, Sophie and Adrian. They were watching him. Sophie was holding a glass of wine, looking across the gap between the yachts. She wasn't gloating, she wasn't cheering, she was just watching. Witnessing the collapse of the structure she had helped build, the structure that had rejected her. Julian felt a surge of hatred so pure it made him dizzy. He wanted to scream at her. He wanted to blame her. But as he looked at the police lights flashing on the shore, French police cars pulling up to the dock where his boat was moored, he realized the truth. He hadn't aged her out. He hadn't discarded her. He had underestimated her. And in the world of high finance, underestimating your risk is the one sin that is never forgiven. He watched as two French officers walked up the gangway of the Bella V. Julian Vance straightened his jacket. He took one last look at the ex-wife standing on the billion-dollar deck, unreachable, untouchable. "Well played, Sophie," he whispered into the salt air. The officers stepped onto the deck. "Monsieur Vance." Julian nodded. He held out his hands. The concept of time changes when you strip away the markers of a high-end life. For Julian Vance, time used to be measured in quarterly earnings reports, flight durations to Davos, and the sweeping second hand of a Patek Philippe. Now, 18 months into a 7-year sentence, at the Federal Correctional Institution, Otisville time was measured in the rhythmic, maddening buzzing of the fluorescent lights and the heavy metallic clank of the automated locking mechanisms. Otisville was known in the press as a club fed, a place where white-collar criminals went to play tennis and wait out their sentences. But the reality was far grimmer. It was a warehouse for men who had once been gods of their own tiny universes, now reduced to inventory numbers. Julian was inmate number 89402B. He sat in the communal recreation room, a space that smelled permanently of industrial pine cleaner and stale body odor. The air conditioning was broken, a stifling humidity hanging over the plastic chairs. It was a Tuesday evening, which meant news hour. Julian usually avoided the news. The financial segments were too painful. Seeing the ticker tape scroll across the bottom of the screen, the S&P 500 hitting record highs, tech stocks soaring, felt like watching a party through a window that had been bricked over. He had missed the greatest bull run in a decade while sitting in a cage. "Yo, Vance," a bulky inmate named Miller grunted. Miller had been a corrupt union boss in Jersey. He liked tormenting Julian. "Turn it up. Your girl is on." Julian froze. He looked up from the book he was pretending to read, a tattered paperback thriller from the prison library. On the wall-mounted television, the screen had shifted to a live feed from London. The banner at the bottom read, "Breaking Phoenix Partners acquires historic Sotheby's lot." But the camera wasn't focused on an auctioneer. It was focused on a woman standing at a podium inside the Tate Modern. It was Sophie. Julian felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him lightheaded. He hadn't seen her since the night on the dock in Monaco, the night the police lights had reflected in her diamonds. She looked magnificent and terrifying. Gone was the soft, eager-to-please housewife who used to fret over whether the napkins matched the tablecloths. The woman on the screen was carved from marble. She wore a cream-colored structured suit from the Row, the kind that cost more than the average American car. Her hair was cut in a sharp asymmetrical bob that framed a face radiating absolute unshakable confidence. She wasn't just a participant in the economy anymore. She was a titan. "We are pleased." Sophie spoke into the microphone, her voice clear and modulated, "to announce the launch of the Restoration Initiative. This is a $100 million endowment dedicated to recovering, restoring, and returning stolen and looted art to its rightful owners." A journalist from the BBC raised a hand. "Ms. Thorne, this is a massive commitment. Can you speak to the source of the initial funding? There are rumors that this capital was derived from a rather contentious liquidation." Julian leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the plastic armrests of his chair. "Don't say it," he prayed. "Don't you dare say my name." Sophie smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. She looked directly into the camera lens, and for a second, Julian felt like she was staring right into the damp, miserable common room in upstate New York. "Transparency is the cornerstone of my new life," Sophie said. "So yes, I can confirm the source. The initial capital for this foundation was raised through the aggressive acquisition and subsequent liquidation of the distressed assets of Vance Capital." The room in the prison went silent. Even Miller stopped chewing his gum. "We purchased the firm's real estate portfolio at auction," Sophie continued, her voice smooth as silk, "including a penthouse in Tribeca and an estate in the Hamptons. We found that the previous owner had over-leveraged these properties. By stripping them down, removing the excess, and selling them at fair market value, we generated a significant surplus. I suppose you could say my ex-husband finally made a positive contribution to the world of culture. It just cost him everything he owned to do it." The press corps erupted in laughter. It wasn't polite laughter. It was genuine amusement at the brutality of the takedown. Julian felt a physical blow to his chest. She had bought his house, the Hamptons house. The one he had told her was purchased through the LLC, so she couldn't touch it. She hadn't just touched it. She had bought it for pennies on the dollar, flipped it, and used the profit to build a monument to her own benevolence. "That's cold, Vance," Miller laughed, shaking his head in mock sympathy. "She didn't just divorce you, she liquidated you." Julian stood up, his legs shaking. He couldn't watch anymore. He turned and walked back toward his cell, the sound of Sophie's voice following him down the concrete corridor. Restoration is about seeing value where others see trash. He reached his cell and collapsed onto the thin mattress. He closed his eyes, but he couldn't shut out the image. He thought about the notebook, the black ledger he had ignored for years. He had thought she was writing grocery lists. He had thought she was planning dinner parties. He realized now, too late, that she had been the only person in the room who was actually paying attention. He had built a house of cards, and he had handed her the fan. The view from the summit. 400 miles away, the Atlantic Ocean crashed rhythmically against the dunes of East Hampton. The house on Lily Pond Lane was unrecognizable from the mausoleum of gray marble and chrome that Julian Vance had built. The gates were open. The driveway, once lined with pretentious imported Italian cypress trees that couldn't survive the salt air, was now bordered by wild hydrangeas and beach plums. Sophie sat on the expansive teak deck, her legs tucked under her. She was wearing a simple cashmere sweater and linen pants, holding a glass of vintage Sancerre. The air smelled of salt jasmine and victory. The screen door slid open with a soft hush. Adrian Thorne stepped out. He was barefoot, wearing a faded navy t-shirt and jeans. It was a stark contrast to the tuxedo he had worn in Monaco, but Sophie preferred him this way. This was the man, not the myth. "The press conference is trending," Adrian said, sitting on the edge of her lounge chair. "The Financial Times just ran an op-ed calling you the Robin Hood of the art world, although technically Robin Hood didn't keep a 10% management fee." Sophie laughed, the sound free and light. "I earned that fee. Dealing with the SEC lawyers regarding Julian's forfeiture took 5 years off my life." "It was worth it," Adrian said. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm, his grip solid. Their relationship defied the easy labels the tabloids tried to stick on them. Were they lovers? Yes. Were they business partners? Absolutely. But mostly they were two people who had seen the darker side of human nature and decided to build their own light. Adrian had never tried to rescue her. He had simply handed her the weapon, the checkbook, the introduction, the platform, and watched her swing it. "I got a letter today," Sophie said, looking out at the darkening horizon where the sea met the sky. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Fan mail?" "Not exactly. It was from Bella." "The influencer," Adrian scoffed. "I thought she moved to Dubai to find an oil tycoon." "Apparently that didn't work out." She's back in Los Angeles. She's rebranding as a wellness coach. Sophie took a sip of her wine. She wrote to ask if I would be interested in investing in her new startup. She said that considering we have shared history, she thought I would want to support women uplifting women. Adrian laughed so hard he nearly choked on his water. You have got to be kidding me. The woman who stood on the yacht and laughed at your dress, the woman who called you a passenger. The very same. What did you do with the letter? Sophie smiled. I had my assistant send her a standard rejection letter, the same form letter Julian used to send to failed startups. I thought the symmetry was poetic. She set her glass down on the table. The wind was picking up a cool breeze that signaled the end of summer. Sophie looked around the deck. This house used to be a symbol of her inadequacy. Julian had designed every inch of it to make her feel small, to make her feel like a guest in her own marriage. He had chosen the furniture. She wasn't allowed to sit on the art. She wasn't allowed to critique the life she wasn't allowed to lead. Now she had gutted it. She had torn out the marble floors and installed reclaimed white oak. She had taken down the generic investment-grade pop art and replaced it with moody, complex seascapes by emerging artists she believed in. She had exorcised the ghost of Julian Vance, not with sage, but with success. Do you ever think about him? Adrian asked quietly, sensing her mood shift. Sophie paused. She looked at the lighthouse blinking in the distance at Montauk Point. I used to, she admitted. In the beginning, when I was working at the gallery scrubbing varnish off old frames. I used to think about him every day. I used to replay the divorce meeting in my head, wishing I had screamed, wishing I had thrown the chair through the window. And now. Sophie turned to look at Adrian. Her eyes were clear, devoid of the shadows that had haunted her for a decade. Now I realized that he was necessary. I was asleep, Adrian. For 10 years I was sleepwalking through a life that didn't fit me. He woke me up. He pushed me off the cliff. He didn't know I could fly, but he's the reason I had to learn. Adrian smiled, a genuine soft expression that softened the sharp angles of his face. You didn't just learn to fly, Sophie. You learned to hunt. Maybe, she whispered. She stood up and walked to the railing. Below, the waves crashed against the shore, eroding the sand, changing the landscape bit by bit. It was a reminder that nothing was permanent. Wealth, status, power, it could all be washed away in a single tide cycle if you weren't paying attention. Julian hadn't paid attention. He had looked at the price tag of everything and the value of nothing. Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. It was the cheap plastic pen she had accidentally kept from the law firm that day, the pen she had used to sign the divorce papers, the pen she had used to sign away her rights for $50,000. She had kept it in her purse for 2 years as a reminder of her lowest moment. She held it over the railing. What's that? Adrian asked. The last piece of inventory, Sophie said. She opened her hand. The pen fell tumbling down through the cool night air, disappearing into the dune grass below. It was gone. Come inside, Adrian said, standing up and holding out his hand. I opened a bottle of the 82 Latour, and the curator from the Louvre is calling at 9. He wants to know if you're serious about buying the Vermeer. Sophie took his hand. I'm always serious, Adrian. They walked back into the warm golden light of the house, sliding the glass door shut against the night, leaving the cold and the dark outside where it belonged. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the anatomy of the ultimate clapback. Julian Vance thought he was discarding a depreciating asset. He thought he could write Sophie off like a bad debt. But he forgot the golden rule of business and of life. Information is currency. While he was busy buying yachts he couldn't afford and impressing people who didn't care, Sophie was balancing the books. She didn't get mad. She got detailed. She took the very tools of his trade, the ledgers, the dates, the hidden accounts, and used them to dismantle his life brick by brick. It's a brutal ending for Julian, rotting in a cell while his ex-wife uses his own money to build a legacy. But you have to ask yourself, did he create the monster? Or did he just reveal the genius that was already there? I want to hear your take in the comments. Was Sophie's takeover of his assets justice, or was it too ruthless? If you were in her shoes, would you have kept the Vance money or burned it all down? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, destroy that like button. It really helps us get these stories out to more people. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Next week, we're covering a story about a Silicon Valley intern who was fired for thinking too small, only to build a competitor that bankrupted his former boss in 6 months. You do not want to miss that one. Until then, keep your receipts and stay solvent.